What up, perps? Kid Copy is back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here. Repping America, the center, and common sense. Wow. Look at a few lack of common senses. So let's get it going. So overnight came news that Lindsey Graham died at the age of 71. I don't really have much to say there. Just thought I'd at least mention it. I don't really know how it's all going to shake out. Probably won't make much of a difference one way or the other, to be honest with you. And of course, we're attacking Iran again. You know, I find it really odd that Iran attacks a ship from Cyprus. The crew have to abandon it, so we fire back. Then Iran launches missiles into its neighboring countries. And these neighboring countries haven't gotten together and formed some sort of coalition to go after them. I don't know what it is. I think a lot of people are afraid. And that's one of the things that drives a lot of our decisions nowadays is people are just afraid. Nobody is willing to really just stand up and do what's right and deal with the consequences. I myself am in that same thing, you know. Trying to evict people from my mom's home who moved in after my brother essentially drove her out. And, I'm sure there's going to be retribution, but we'll deal with that. Too many cowards are running the show right now. Anyhow, they always like to talk about housing crises, They like to mix that up with the drug-addled population that's roaming the streets doing whatever the F they want. And the answer to housing for a lot of people nowadays is ADUs, additional dwelling units. I believe that's what it is. That's what I call it anyhow. But, it allows people to build houses on the property that they own that they can then have their kids or relatives live in. And, one of them up in San Jose, an ADU that was built in the backyard, it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath ADU. It just was sold for $500,000. I mean, I'm guessing $500,000 for a piece of property in San Jose ain't bad. I know where I live, $500,000 would be pretty cheap. And the government is continually going around trying to figure out how to do this. Unused warehouses or unused business properties or building up these expensive projects that they have. And they often cost way more than they need to. But citizens aren't spending other people's money. They're spending their own money. So they kind of keep an eyeball on where the costs are going. And I think in a lot of ways, that's one of the things that we have to change here in California. We have to stop looking at the government for solutions. The government is failing us. The government doesn't really care about people who are doing things the right way, being victimized by people doing things the wrong way. I've found that in the case that I have right now, where seemingly nobody really wants to do anything about my brother, his actions, what his actions have caused, the fact that he's moved people into my mom's place and is charging them rent. Like, it's all just elder abuse and fraud, but yet nobody really seems all that moved to do anything about it. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. There was a time, a long time ago, where citizens just had to take care of stuff on their own. The Wild Wild West, there weren't police forces. There weren't a whole bunch of laws. I mean, there were laws against cattle rustling, but there really wasn't anybody who was going to enforce those. It was usually left up to like a single sheriff to round up a posse and go after these people. But part of the problem too is that the government, especially here in California, is so worried about all the wrong things. Gavin Newsom just signed a budget and he put in a $26 million safety net for trans youth care amid Trump cuts. Oh, okay. The spending comes after providers warn that federal cuts could threaten access to care for transgender Californians. Okay, they say this all the time, they like to use these words like could, to rally everybody. And, one of the people who was very supportive of this comes from the Trans Family Support Services. And she said this historic investment will help keep care accessible, support the providers doing this life-saving work, and remind trans youth people that California will not abandon them. Well, nobody was talking about abandoning them. And life-saving, that is very much up for debate. Okay? I mean, you could make the life-saving argument for a lot of really crazy stuff out there. You really could. And oddly enough, here in California, one of the things that could save your life is a gun, but they want to take that away. Right? They do. I mean, we've seen it. They just banned all brand new sales of Glock in California. But this is important to them. Well, why it's important to them is because special interest groups demanded it. And Gavin and the California Democrats bow to the special interests because the special interests are the people who rally the support for them, who rally other groups that aren't even connected to support these kinds of causes. And I'm sure somewhere along the line, Gavin realized that he could siphon some of this money off to his wife's charity that will then give money to her company that makes, educational films for schools. Right? And, another one, this executive director of Equity California, or Quality California, transgender healthcare remains legal and medically necessary in California. I don't know that it's medically necessary. I know that there are a lot of things in California that are really necessary, such as water and electricity, but barely a blip on these guys' screens. They don't care. They want to do the thing that gets them the headlines and makes everybody super happy with them, and they'll vote for them again, and they'll look the other way. And it's getting ridiculous. All across this country, we are seeing one similar problem, that all states have to either be red or blue nowadays. You can't have purple states, right? Nobody wants that. They want it one way or the other. And neither side has the ideas to make it work, because they're allowing special interest groups to be put at the head of the line. What about just the average person? The average person should be at the head of the line. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't protect trans youth. I'm certainly not saying that trans youth people should be discriminated against in the medical community. But simply just throwing money at a problem, and especially a problem that affects a small amount of people, doesn't seem to make sense when California, Los Angeles, other cities around the state are struggling to meet basic needs. You see, if all the basic needs were being taken care of, then I wouldn't mind the special interest spending. But the problem is that special interest spending is the priority. All right, let's cleanse our palate with something a little funnier here. Waymo called the cops on teen riders. Of course, this comes from NPR, so they say, raising privacy concerns. These two little assholes were out there in a Jaguar electric vehicle in Tempe, Arizona. Okay? They were drinking alcohol and shooting basically pellet guns from the car at people. The Waymo systems detected behavior that then triggered a safety response, after which the company disabled the vehicle and contacted police. Yeah, they basically drove them into a parking lot. The police were already on their way. The kids didn't get out of the car. They stayed in the car. And the police performed a high-risk stop on him and got him out. So they were talking about transparency because, of course, for some reason, when it suits them, the lefties like NPR are concerned about privacy. They're concerned about protecting the criminals. That's really what it is. So Google has said in a transparency report, Google says it's received nearly 290,000 requests from governments worldwide in the first 6 months of 2025 for disclosure of user information. 80% of those requests were, some information was disclosed in about 80% of those cases. Google, of course, is the gatekeeper for it. So if Google doesn't really want to help out, Google won't help out. Which is just, Here's a great one. You know, San Mateo Police Department spokesperson Janine Luna said that detaining the kids in the Waymo on Monday was wholly appropriate under the circumstances. We received the call of a firearm being shot from a moving vehicle. Furthermore, the occupants were described as being possibly intoxicated. Yeah. So, but they want to go on and say things like autonomous taxis represent an ethical gray area. Well, okay. But if you're in a car and they are driving you to the airport, what are they going to report on? Everything's already reporting on you. Your cell phone, your car, everything, your TV. Your TV reports back to somebody. Somebody collects that information and they sell it. That's what's done nowadays. This one person talking about the director of the Internet Ethics Program at Santa Clara. She used Waymo's driverless taxis and says ethically the privacy issues surrounding them sit in a gray area. Quote, there's something about being in a car without another person that makes you think it's private. But these very same people have no problem with cameras issuing tickets. See, they have no problem. The problem that we have in this country is that depending on the circumstances, one side will support it, but then the next day they'll be against it, and then they'll be back. Nobody is looking at these things logically. Logically, Waymo had a reason to call the police. These kids were shooting guns. How does Waymo know that they're not real guns? I don't know. How do most people know that they're not real guns? You just guess? They didn't have orange tips on them. They have no problem with that. I wanted to cover this one because I have a deep respect for the indigenous people of all countries. Okay? The people who were there 40,000 years ago. So that's why I don't really like the Native American term. We'll find out some other people don't like that either. But they weren't native here. They came over, land bridges or in canoes, many different ways to get to America. But California is now going to war against Indians. Isn't that great? I mean, this is from 2024, but it's popping up again because there's been more movement on it. In 2024, Governor Gavin Newsom signed AB 3074, a law that prevents schools from using any, quote, derogatory Native American term. Oh, okay. So does that count like Redskins? Sure. But here's some other ones that's on the list. Apaches, Big Reds, Braves, Chiefs, Chieftains, Chippewa, Comanches, Indians, Savages, Squaw, and Tribe. So in that list, I would say probably Savages. Kind of makes sense. I don't know if you want to be called the New York Savages. That doesn't sound like a great team name to begin with. But, you know, there's two exceptions to this rule. Public schools that are run by Native American tribes, okay, that actually makes sense. And schools that obtain written consent from a local federally recognized tribe to use a derogatory Native American term for the school or an athletic team name, mascot, or nickname. The law, of course, because these things aren't well thought out by these brainiacs in Sacramento, the law doesn't say what happens if Native American tribes disagree over whether a term is derogatory. Yeah, Braves, Chiefs, I'm not sure how that's derogatory. Comanche, Chippewa, Apaches, I mean, those are names. I mean, Kiowa is the name of a helicopter. The Apache is the name of a helicopter in the U.S. military. Plenty of people use these terms. These terms keep them alive. They keep people conscious of the people who came before us. But, you know, whether or not it's derogatory, don't fret about it because I'm sure some white people will sort that out. You see how racist this is? It's one thing to say that you can't use a demeaning term, but Cleveland Indians? How is that derogatory? That's who they are. The irony is that Indian has come back into vogue because some indigenous Americans feel that Native American is too sterile and actually prefer Indian. That is one of the reasons that the federal agency that deals with indigenous people, the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, has not changed its name. Not even in the woke Obama and Biden administrations. Because they're not derogatory. Having an Indian as a mascot is not derogatory. I can understand Redskins, okay? I can kind of get that one. That was used, by some as a basically an N-word for them. But Chiefs, how is that any different than calling it the presidents? I mean, it's the same thing. There's just a lack of logic. There is this rush to seem like you're doing some important work, but you don't actually do any work on it. I do not understand this. I do not understand how Braves or Chiefs, whatever. Let's move on. But, as they say, ironically, the attack on what Newsom's law calls derogatory names for Native Americans has made the indigenous people of North America less visible than they were before. This comes from the California Post. What is worse, being a little offended or being erased from memory? See, that's the thing. One of the problems that I have with people on the left is that they want to rewrite and sterilize history. We're Americans. To me, being an American is to be able to look at the sins of the past and to deal with them and go, yeah, that was effed up. But we don't have to do anything. We don't have to pay reparations. Slavery was horrible. Slavery was bad. But nobody that is alive today owns slaves or were slaves. So giving them money, that's just buying votes. That's just buying this fake love. Like, respect Indians. Learn about their cultures. Learn what they've given us. Support them in ways that you can. And when you think of teams like the Chiefs and stuff, remember, these were proud people. They were proud people. And yes, a lot of them got wiped out by the Europeans. That's human history. You have to be able to look at history. Okay, Washington owned slaves. Wow. So did a lot of people. You have to look at history and say, yes, mistakes were made. And we've atoned for those. And we've corrected those. But trying to whitewash history is exactly that. Whitewashing. It's racist. It's straight up racist to tell members of indigenous tribes that their tribe name is derogatory. Us calling somebody, our team, the Apaches, is derogatory to the Apaches. How is that? I mean, if that's the case, maybe we should remove all the animal names. All the bears, the hawks, the falcons, the seahawks, all that. Because aren't we being derogatory to the animals? It's just nonsense. You want to hear some more nonsense? The LA City Council voted 12-0 last month to put a measure on the November 3rd ballot that would allow members to reduce council meetings to once per week. Members of the council are among the highest paid local legislators in America, with base salaries starting at $245,000. As you're trying to get by on $45,000, they get an extra $200,000 for their shitty leadership. They said, let the voters decide. And as this piece says, this is classic behavior from socialists and bureaucrats who love more pay for less work. It's not about efficiency. It's about convenience for insiders who benefit from expansive government while delivering poor results. And that's one of the things that we have wrong in America. All across the country, elected officials that have power or influence set their own compensation, perks, and operating rules. We're better off having independent commissions to depoliticize pay. Here, the council members aren't directly voting themselves a raise, but they are seeking to reduce a core public obligation while crises mount and their compensation remains eye-poppingly generous. Look, I mean, LA City Council has failed at just about every objective they've had. The only thing they ever succeed at doing is raising taxes and getting laws passed that only hurt the average citizen. You want to see like this? You want to see it? Figueroa Corridor, one of California's most notorious sex markets. This is from the California Post. Figueroa Gavin Newsom and Scott Wiener's canyon of despair. Yeah, because this was the predictable result of public policy. In 2022, Gavin Newsom signed a law decriminalizing loitering with intent to commit prostitution. So now you are allowed to just walk around and solicit prostitution. We're not going to stop you, right? This Figueroa corridor is 4 miles of nearly nude women just selling themselves. Lines of cars slowly cruising along, looking to buy. But they just roll on by. The pimps are out there. They're taking it. Talking to Stephanie Powell, a former sergeant in the LAPD Vice Unit and former executive director at Journey Out, an LA-based nonprofit serving human trafficking, rode with the reporter from the C-Post. Statistically, she says, the average age of entry for human sex trafficking is between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. Yeah. They're being trafficked. And they're being trafficked in a known area where everybody knows that this is happening. Because it wasn't enough to just decriminalize walking along, loitering with the intent to commit prostitution. No, Wiener had to take it a step further. And he enlisted the Anti-Defamation League, the ACLU, in Equality, California. Because they referenced transgender adults who were being arrested for walking while trans. Right. Yeah. This is what Newsom wrote. Black adults account for 56% of loitering charges in LA between 2017 and 2019, despite making up less than 10% of the city's population. To be clear, this bill does not legalize prostitution. It simply revokes provisions of the law that have led to disproportionate harassment of women and transgender adults. Okay, why were you talking about black people? Were you reminding people that even though they only make up 10% of the city population, they make up over 50% of prostitutes? Was that what your point was? I understand. People are going to get picked up for looking the wrong way. I understand that. But are we now supposed to make omelets without breaking eggs? Because we need these tools. As they were talking about, before Wiener and Newsom passed this stupid law, police officers could use a woman's attire and behavior to determine that she was loitering to commit prostitution. Once that behavior was decriminalized, prostitutes began wearing hardly any clothes, and law enforcement found itself helpless to control the sex trade. SB 357 also enabled traffickers. In the past, a patrol officer could arrest a loitering prostitute to get her off the streets and encourage her to testify against the trafficker. Today, they have to use undercover units who aren't receiving enough funding. So the federal government stepped in. In August of 2025, First Assistant U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley spearheaded the region's first ever RICO human trafficking case against the vicious Hoover criminal gang. They charged 6 members and associates of the Hoovers with various crimes, including sex trafficking of minors, money laundering, and sexual exploitation. Yeah. On July 1st of this year, they had a follow-up and they took down another 10 suspects, including the operators of a seedy motel. But when they signed this law, they knew what the results would be. You could see it on social media, San Diego, San Francisco, LA. You could look those up. And you could see how blatantly obvious these women are being. And it doesn't help out the area to have scantily clothed prostitutes wandering around drunk or high on drugs, causing chaos, getting in people's face, threatening violence. The pimps are threatening violence. And nobody can stop them unless they actually catch them in the act of committing prostitution. But this just goes to show you why I have such a visceral hatred of Democrats nowadays. Because after decades of being a Democrat, or a decade of being a Democrat, I started to see the cracks. And I didn't live in an echo chamber. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, let's go through a few things in California. They legalized weed, but that lowered the penalties for the illegal weed growers. So now they're growing in national forests, dumping chemicals into waterways, and at worst, they're getting a $100 fine. Our gun control. They've managed to remove most affordable handguns and rifles from the market, leaving citizens defenseless. They went buck wild on climate change and climate policies. That's just drying up everybody's cash and isn't providing any of the results that they said it would. California still has some of the worst air quality in the country. Electric vehicles and wind farms and solar panels haven't solved it and probably won't ever solve it. And even if we do clean up all of our act, it won't even make a 1% change in the overall climate change because climate is global. California likes to believe that if somebody does something over on the other side of the world, it doesn't count. It does count. Shipping oil in from across the world makes no sense when we've got oil right underneath our dirt. Our homeless solutions are bankrupting the state and cities, because the money is not being spent to actually do anything to end the real homeless crisis, which is not homeless people. It's drug addicts who want to live on the streets. They don't want to be bound by society's rules. They don't want to pay bills. They just want to shit behind a dumpster and do whatever the F they want. And a lot of times what that is stealing copper wire at night, getting high on meth and going out and stealing copper, destroying infrastructure. What's being done about it? Not a thing. Our loose health policies with no oversight have led to rampant fraud because what they do is they cater to the special interests over the needs or desires of the citizens. They don't have answers. They just have sound bites. They placate special interest groups who make sure to keep them in power by funneling money back in the form of campaign donations. But no work actually ever gets done, and nobody holds them accountable. That's what needs to be done. There are Democrats out there right now that are trying to say, oh, we need to embrace the socialists, while others are saying we need to run from them. And we need to run from them because these socialist programs have already proven to be a failure. The government's not going to watch the money. It's ripe for fraud. And at the end of the day, their solutions don't solve anything. Well, that was a fun episode, wasn't it? Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm Kid Copious. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding, and when it gets too much, let the needle drop and dance it out.